The final and probably grandest of the Mesoamerican civilizations is going to be the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs are the major civilization in Mesoamerica when Europeans, especially the Spanish, begin arriving in the early part of the 16th century. And the arrival of Europeans is going to be what brings about the end of the Aztec Empire. Now, the Aztec are latecomers onto the scene. They don't migrate into Mesoamerica until the early part of the 14th century, around 1325. And they begin building their capital city of Tenochtitlan on the islands in and around Lake Texcoco around that time. Now, from there, the Aztecs begin expanding the city. They begin building stone roads and bridges to connect the islands. They eventually expand their control to surround the entire lake of in central Mexico. They also build massive canals, similar to what you would see in Amsterdam or Venice, to further interconnect the islands and the mainland. This allowed for quick travel and easy movement of goods in and out of the capital, as well as armies. And they also built these massive artificial islands in and around the edges of the lake, which they called floating gardens. And this is how they were able to maintain such a massive civilization, because they would use these floating gardens for large scale agriculture to feed their growing population. Now, the government was, again, very similar to what you would see in most of Eurasia. This was an empire ruled by an emperor, very militaristic. The Aztec built their power and their strength by conquering surrounding tribes, and very similar to the Chinese under the Tang and the Sung, they created a tribute system where they would offer conquered tribes some level of autonomy and independence in return for yearly and monthly tribute. And just like the Mayans, as well as many other civilizations in Eurasia, the emperor claimed to be descendant of the gods and was supported again by a social class of rich nobles and priests underneath them. Beneath them were artisans, farmers, slaves, and there was also a separate merchant class known as the Poctesta, which were highly prized and highly regarded as well. So this is a painting of a Spanish map created in the 16th century that laid out what the Aztec capital looked like. As you can see, I mean, it was built centrally in the middle of Lake Texcoco, with roads and bridges connecting the island to the mainland. Now, the city of Tenochtitlan was incredibly impressive in terms of pre-Columbian cities. This city probably could have housed somewhere between 200 and 300,000 people when the Europeans arrived in 1519. No other Aztec cities were nearly as large, and they weren't allowed to be, because that would have presented a threat to the Aztecs and their dominance. The city itself was essentially the center of the entire civilization. Religion, trade, government, everything ran through the capital. So much so that when Cortez arrives in Tenochtitlan in 1519, 1520, he writes that he was surprised to find that the markets in the Aztec capital were not only bigger and richer, but they carried a wider array and better quality goods than you could find in the capital of Spain back in Europe. Now, one of the reasons that you were able to find such amazing goods is not only because of the Aztec dominance of the area, but also because they built very highly regulated trade networks in and out of Mesoamerica. And those trade networks were managed by professional merchants known as Poctesta. These merchants received control over those trade routes and basically a virtual monopoly over those trade routes with a blessing from the emperor. And those networks reach as far as the southwestern United States to the north and as far as Panama to the south. Now, just like within the Mayan civilization and most civilizations of this time, most of the Aztecs were peasant farmers or artisans. The children of the upper classes had the option of joining the army or the government or training to be a priest. But that was isolated only to those upper classes. So the social hierarchy within the Aztec Empire is very rigid, and social mobility is not an easy thing to accomplish within this empire. Most men were expected to either find a job or begin farming by their early teens. Women were expected to marry very early, raise children, keep house, produce goods to be traded at market. Now, religiously, the Aztecs follow very closely in the tradition of the Maya and the Olmec. They are polytheistic with multiple gods, some seen as good, some seen as evil. Those gods are in constant conflict with one another. And the Maya believe that if the evil gods became too powerful, then the world would be destroyed. And in order to replenish the strength of the good gods, the Aztec also, similar to the Maya, practiced human sacrifice. And in order to do this, they either purchased slaves or would capture them in raids against other tribes. Um, what else? So the Aztec also develop a written language. Their language is pictographic, hieroglyphic. Unlike the Maya, who would use alphabet at some times, the Aztec also adopt the Mayan base 20 number system. They also create a very similar sun calendar to the one used by the Mayans. Um, and they flourish for a relatively short period of time. The Aztec dominance over Mesoamerica lasts mainly roughly about 150, almost 200 years. And they are brought down by a combination of disease and invasion by Spanish conquistadors led by Hernan Cortez. And Cortez, using disease to his advantage, um, attacks the city with roughly about 300 of his own men, as well as mercenaries that he has hired from other tribes that are under the control of the Aztec. And under Cortez, Tenochtitlan is destroyed, and he levels the majority of the city and rebuilds it as the modern day city of Mexico City.